So thanks everyone who joins in today. Want to welcome you to Lauren Willig. Um, Lauren is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of more than 20 works of historical fiction. So I think that's very impressive, including Band of Sisters. So that's your latest one, is that correct? Band of Sisters? The Summer Country and the RITA award-winning Pink Carnation series, and three novels co-written with Beatrix Williams and Karen White. So Lauren lives in New York City with her husband, two young children, and vast quantities of coffee. So thanks so much, Lauren, for joining us. And just want to let everyone know that I read Lauren's The Other Daughter. So I've never read any of your novels before and really, really loved this. It's about a woman who finds her life isn't exactly how she thought it was from what her mother told her, and just learning about her other side of the family and everything like that, which was really, really great. And
Oh, I'm so
it's
glad
set
you enjoyed
set
it.
in London, I think. Well, she starts off in Paris and then is in London. Yeah.
Yes, it's my Bright Young Things book. That one's set in the 1920s.
Mm, yeah. So I'll be looking forward to reading more of your books. So do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and like maybe your latest book?
Sure. Actually, my latest book, it's funny because my latest book and the one you read, The Other Daughter, are both outliers for me in a way because they both take place in just one time period with sort of one narrator.
Mm,
For most of my career, I've written dual timeline stories
okay.
where the past and the present interweave. And so, but The Other Daughter was set just in the 1920s,
Mm,
and Band of Sisters, my latest, is set in France in World War One, and it's based on the true story of a group of Smith College alumni who went abroad at the height of World War One to bring humanitarian aid to French villagers right behind the front lines. So that one
okay,
takes
yeah.
place in the winter of 1917, 1918. And sort of, it's funny because when I started writing it, my comfort zone is to do the sort of back and forth in time,
Mm,
intertwined plots thing. And I tried to do that with that book and also actually with Other Daughter. And those were two stories that would not let me do that. They just needed to
mm,
be told as a
at this
single
time.
narrative in time.
Yeah, that's quite interesting to know, yeah. And are your novels all based on something that was true, or some of them not and some are?
Well, most of my novels occupy what I think is sort of the Margaret Mitchell, Carleen Cohen, Colleen McCullough space in historical fiction,
Mm,
where there are fictional characters leading fictional lives, but they bump up against real events and people in the process. So usually my characters are entirely the product of my own imagination, and
yep.
their plot line is entirely made up even when it intersects with real
Mm,
events. The one exception to that is Band of Sisters, where I stumbled on this amazing cache of primary sources in the archives of Smith College, where
mm.
all of these women, the members of the Smith College Relief Unit, had written home letters from their time in the Somme detailing all of the
Oh,
crazy
wow.
things. Oh,
Yeah.
and they were incredible.
Uh,
And if you've ever read Rilla of Ingleside, the last Anne of Green Gables book, they all have that kind of tone. It's sort of
uh,
snarky and earnest and clever and hilarious. And I fell in love with these women and
mm,
their letters, and the stuff that happened to them was so remarkable. There was really, I didn't have to add anything. So
mm.
I mean, because I prefer writing about fictional people because then I can play with their inner lives more. I made my two heroines my own fictional creations, but I put them into the place of real people and
Okay.
had them doing all the things the real people did. So that book
Mm,
is really drawn directly from the historical material. Most of my other books, there's sort of, fake story within a real landscape.
mm. And are all of your books set in Europe?
My books have actually been set all over. And part of that was because I began my career with a very long running series about spies during the
Mm.
Napoleonic Wars.
Oh, okay.
And the first book was set in France, and then I had a book set in England and another set in Ireland. But as the series became popular, I was allowed to sort of have my head in choosing what I wanted to write about. And of course, the Napoleonic Wars ranged, across the globe. And so one book was set in India, another was set in Portugal. And
Okay.
so I really got to roam a bit with that series. I've also written a book set in Kenya, The Ashford Affair, which is set partially in Kenya among the Happy Valley crowd of the 1920s, which was so much fun to write. So I have gone, and I also wrote the book before Band of Sisters was set in colonial Barbados.
Okay. Wow. So a big
So there, I
variety,
had
yeah.
a fair bit of wanderlust. I like to describe my books as set either in England or places where English people go generally. But the English sort of went so far across the globe that touches just about everything.
And have you visited all these places you've written about?
Most of them, not all of them.
Yeah.
I was able to spend some time researching in Barbados for my Barbados book and got the worst mosquito bites of my life.
Oh.
I mean, amazing historical society, really hungry mosquitoes. But I was not, unfortunately, able to go to Kenya for my Kenya book because I was writing that while I was pregnant with my first child. So that just wasn't happening.
No.
And unfortunately, I also didn't make it to India for my India book. But most of the other places are places where I've been and wandered around.
And how do you decide on the setting for your book? What makes you interested in to write that?
A lot of times stories just grab me out of nowhere. The Barbados book, which honestly, that was a topic I had never intended to write about, sort of, colonial slavery and whatnot. That just, I would not have thought of touching that with a 10-foot pole, but I was on vacation with 2 grad school friends and we went on a plantation tour and I heard a story that caught my imagination. I could not get out of my head about a burnt plantation and the Portuguese ward of the owner. So the owner's child by an enslaved woman who he claimed was his ward and the daughter of a friend by a Portuguese woman. But anyway, the child died in the fire. And all I wanted to know was where her mother was and who her mother was. And had the mother agreed to her becoming a Portuguese ward, or was the child stripped from her? And none of the guides were able to tell me anything.
Okay.
And that story haunted me for years. I couldn't get this missing mother out of my head. And so finally I had to sit down and research colonial Barbados and write that book. And with Band of Sisters, I stumbled on the Smith College Relief Unit by accident while I was researching another book, and was so fascinated by the idea of this group of Smith College alumni in the Somme, right behind the trenches, that I had to go and learn more about them. So I feel like in many ways the story chooses me instead of my choosing the story.
No, thanks for that. And can you tell us a little bit about how you became a writer? Is it something you'd always wanted to do?
Yes, I'm one of those annoying people. When I was 6, I announced to my class that I was going to be a writer when I grew up. And I went to a very small all-girls school. There were only 27 people in my class. And once you make a pronouncement like that, everyone knows about it for the rest of your life, and you really have to stick with it. So I spent most of my youth accumulating vast piles of paper, first handwritten, and then those old printers that had the things on the sides that you had to tear off. I don't know if anyone else remembers those, but yeah. But anyway, so I spent most of my youth writing manuscripts. So I like to joke that by the time I got published at 26, I had already been in the business for 20 years.
And how hard or easy was it for you to be first published?
I got really, really lucky. One of the things I've learned is that this business is so much about luck and timing and forces that are beyond your control. Because my cunning plan had always been, I really wanted to write big doorstop historical novels like Colleen McCullough's The Thornbirds. And so I went off to grad school to get my PhD in Tudor Stuart England with the theory that this would give me the background I needed to write my giant 17th century epic. And while I was doing my dissertation, though, I was, going completely mad, as grad students tend to do, and starting to think in footnotes. I had to do something fun to keep from going entirely insane. So I decided to write a romp, a Scarlet Pimpernel spoof about, mixed with a lot of Blackadder and cheap jokes about swashbuckling spies during the Napoleonic Wars, because I knew enough about the Napoleonic Wars that it was familiar, but I wasn't working on it. So it hadn't become, boring to me in the way anything you're actually working on actually does. And so I wrote this Napoleonic romp just for fun with a modern frame character, a grad student doing her dissertation research in London and not finding the secret paper she wanted to find, which, had happened to me. And so, it's the wish fulfillment where I got to give my characters the historical sources I wished I was finding. And anyway, but that book was supposed to be the just for fun book. It was filled with inside jokes and, snark and all that sort of thing. It got passed around a circle of my friends. And one of them had a friend who was an agent. And she handed it off to him. And it just so happened that this was a person who was looking to switch from representing more serious fiction to lighter fiction. And my manuscript happened to cross his desk at the just that right moment. And so the next thing I knew, I suddenly had a 2-book contract. But it was one of these, it's so funny how when you plan things, they never quite work. But when you stumble into things, they do.
Yeah. And could you tell us a bit about how, you've written a lot of books, 20, I think I said. How long does it usually take you for each book? And has it changed the more you've written? Has it got longer or shorter the more you've...
Honestly, it varies. And I would say the limiting factors have to do less with sort of my own experience and more with how research heavy the book is. For the Barbados book, I spent a couple of years researching because I felt like I really needed to get that right. So there's the research factor on the one hand. Some books require more than others. And there's the small children factor on the other hand. Because right around the time I wrote my 10th book, I had my first child. And suddenly I realized that, wow, that entirely changed the game. The fastest I have ever written a book was 6 weeks from start to finish.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it was one of those where when I had my daughter, I had decided that, everyone knows mothers are the most productive people in the world. I was afraid now that I had a kid, I would use as an excuse to slack. So I called my agent, who also didn't have kids, and said, let's sign me up for more books. So I'll have to be motivated. And we doubled my writing schedule. And then I had this child who believed that naps were something that happened to other children. And so what wound up happening was my deadlines for each book, I was signed up to write 5 books in 2 years.
Oh, wow.
My deadlines for each book wound up moving a couple of months until by the time I got to that last book in that series of books I was due to write, there were 6 weeks. And they told me it was a hard deadline. If I was even a day late, the book was going to be bumped back a year. And that could not happen. And so that book got written in a mad fever dream from start to finish from February 1st to March 15th. And it was in.
Yeah.
But I never want to do that ever again.
And how was the success of that book that you wrote so quick?
The funny thing was people loved it. That was the 12th book in the Pink Carnation series. So I think it helped that it was the cumulative book in a series I had been writing for so long. So I knew these characters, I knew this world. And on top of it, because it was the final book, I think if I had had the time, I would have stressed over it and overthought it.
Yeah.
Because I had to write it fast, I couldn't overthink it and ruin it.
And we've got a few people watching, which is great. So people watching, if you've got any questions, please type them in comments. We've got one question from Patricia, which is also a question I've been wondering. When you co-author a book, how do you manage the different timelines, and do you each write a separate section?
Yes. So, we sort of stumbled. So Beatrice and Karen and I stumbled into our method of writing together, and it's just happened to work for us. This all started because we're really good friends, and we were drinking one night at a conference and bemoaning the fact that we didn't get to drink together more frequently because we all live different places. And so one of us, I don't remember which anymore, came up with a brilliant idea of, if we write a book together, they'll have to tour us together and pay for our bar bill. And so we were very excited by this cunning plan, even when we woke up with our hangovers the next morning. And so we all got together. Karen flew up from Georgia. Beatrice took the train down from Connecticut. I walked 10 blocks from my apartment in New York. And we met up over tea and scones to sort of try to hammer out how we were going to do this. And the crazy thing was we wound up basically outlining the book over about 4 hours of very strong tea and way too much clotted cream. And we found, because now let's outline our own books. We're all sort of seat of the pants writers who are very character driven, and we figure out what's happening as we go along. But we sat there and we started throwing ideas off each other. And the next thing we knew, we were doing a chapter by chapter outline with 3 time periods. But of course, these are the sort of Kate Morden-esque type books where the time periods interweave, which was the sort of books we all write on our own. So we figured, okay, 3 time periods, 3 viewpoint characters. We each do a character, but we plotted the whole book out together. And then what happens is, after we plot it, we each pick a character. So by then we've all done all of the character development, all of the plotting together. We all own the whole book. But then we pick a character and we to write. And we write round robin, and the chapters always go sort of ABC, ABC. So the first one writes her chapter, sends it to the others. And so you're always reading the other 2's previous chapters before you write your own. And so that's how we do it. And so that's how we sort of we mesh our voices that way. But yeah, we each take a timeline. Or in one of our books, we have 2 characters in the same timeline. And in that case, there were 2 of us who had characters in the same timeline and 1 who had the frame character.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that.
Divine, it was very Byzantine.
Yeah. Divine's wondering when we can expect the next book by the 3 Ws.
Well, we're working on the 4th Team W book right now. It's currently due September 1st. So we're trying to figure out, we're hoping, because part of our process is we like to get together at the beginning of a book to plot it out together, which we wound up doing via FaceTime this year rather than in person. And then we get together at the end to all read through the manuscript together and edit and find any plot holes and that kind of thing. So right now we're trying to find a good time for our editing it retreat. But anyway, that book is due to come out in autumn of 2023.
Okay.
So a year from this coming autumn.
Yeah. And when did the first book come out that you wrote together?
That one came out, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember the year now. I think it was, as I cast my mind back, 2015. So that first one was called The Forgotten Room.
And you've been doing that for a little while then, yeah.
Oh yeah, no, because we wind up doing one basically every 2 years, because the problem is fitting them in around we all write our own books too, so finding a time to fit these books in around our own releases is actually the hardest part.
Yeah, I can imagine, yeah. And around your young family as well.
Well, Beatrice and Karen complain that I am always pregnant, which is not true. I only have 2 kids, but they both have older kids, and I just started having babies right around the time we started writing together. So, we've had to sort of jigger our retreats around, my stages of pregnancy at various points and all that.
Yeah. And with your books, you obviously do a lot of research. Could you tell us, is there anything that you've ever found when you've been doing your research that has really, really surprised you?
All the time. But the funny thing is, Band of Sisters came out of a piece of research that surprised me. Because it was actually, I was researching for, Beatrice and Karen and I were writing a book called All the Ways We Said Goodbye, which is set in France in World War I, World War II in the 1960s. And, we all researched together as we're outlining together. And one of the things we needed to know for the World War I portion of that book was Christmas customs in Picardy in World War I. And I was looking desperately to see how Christmas would have been celebrated under the German occupation, World War I. Would they still have had their traditional Christmas cake? This is the stuff that authors really stress about, because you'll get that email from the one person who'll be like, they didn't have their traditional Christmas cake in, winter of 1914. So anyway, I was desperately Googling Christmas customs, Picardy, World War I, and up popped this memoir by a Smith alumna talking about throwing Christmas parties for villagers behind the front line. And I thought, that's crazy. What on earth are a group of Smithies doing dressed up like Father Christmas, like 7 miles behind the trenches? This is nuts. And that's always the stuff that catches your attention. Actually, another one of my books, the 6th book in my Pink Carnation series, Betrayal of the Blood Lily, is set in Hyderabad, partially because I knew that book was going to be set in India. And when I started researching India in 1804, one of the things that popped up was that the Nizam of Hyderabad had an all-female bodyguard.
Oh, wow.
And that just, another one, because you just find these things and you think, oh my gosh, that can't possibly be true. But
Mm,
of course they are, and then you just have to learn more about them.
mm, mm. Yeah, it must be very, very interesting.
Oh yeah, I mean, my husband jokes I'm like a magpie. I'm like, ooh, shiny thing, because you keep coming up against these historical incidents that seem like anomalies, and then you read about them, you look into them, and you realize that the events aren't anomalies. It's that we have this image of the past that's been shaped by our own present. And that
Mm.
often it's not the past that's weird, it's our image of the past. And you have to sort of readjust your thinking to make sense of what actually happened as opposed to what we think ought to have happened.
Yeah, yeah. And you said before that your characters are usually made up people. Can you tell us a little bit about how you decide on your characters and the names and that, where you get the names of the characters?
Well, my characters, I like to joke they're sort of Frankenstein creations, because often what I do is I steal bits and pieces from real people, and I'll
Mm,
take this from one person's life and that from another person's life. And so sometimes the names of my characters are a homage to people I stole bits of them from.
mm.
Other times I'm just trying to find names that work for the period. In the case of Band of Sisters, my two heroines are Kate and Emmy, short for Emmeline. And I named my Emmy because she's the daughter of a socialite suffragette. And so, of course, Emmeline Pinkhurst popped immediately to mind, and she had to be Emmeline. And Kate was Kate because her character is based heavily on Francie Nolan from A Tree Grows in Brooklyn.
Okay.
And Francie's mother in that book is Katie.
Mm,
So I got my Kate from there. So often the names are little sort of Easter eggs that give you a clue as to what I was thinking about when I made up
mm,
that character.
mm,
And sometimes they're just, I was looking for period names and trying to find a name that would fit that character.
mm, mm. Could you tell us, are you working on something new at the moment?
I am, although I have to confess, I feel like such a slacker. It's wound up being pushed back a year because,
Okay.
I have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old. So with the
Mm,
pandemic this year, it just, all
mm,
schedules went out the window.
mm.
But so that book, it's a prequel to Band of Sisters. This
Okay.
is another one where the story reached out and grabbed me. In Band of Sisters, so the Smith College Relief Unit was founded by a groundbreaking female archaeologist who was also a humanitarian and war nurse. I mean, an amazing and fascinating character. I have a character, of course, in the book who is very closely based on that real
Mm,
woman. And as I was writing Band of Sisters, that character started dropping little hints to me about her past. Until I knew I just had to go back to the 1890s and write her
mm,
story.
mm.
And so this is another Frankenstein job where she's based very heavily on the real woman, but I took bits of that real woman's life and mixed them up with other stuff to create my
Okay.
fictional character.
Yeah, no, that sounds interesting. And will that be out next year?
That will be out. So that book, it takes place partially in the Greco-Turkish War of 1897 and partially in the Spanish-American War of 1898. Another nice quiet book. And that book is going to be out in spring of 2023. It was supposed to be
Okay.
out in spring of 2022, and then it got
Yeah.
pushed back the year.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
And Patricia's wondering if you get to choose your own titles.
It's a give and take.
Mm,
There have been times when I have and times when I haven't. And it's often a collaborative process. Sometimes there's the old joke about the camel being the animal that was designed by committee. And there are times when, titles feel like that. The one I remember the most was my third Pink Carnation book. And I still hate that title. The title is The Deception of the Emerald Ring, because it was set in Ireland, and all the other books in that series have flower titles, but no
okay.
one could think of a green flower. And they also did like How the Pink Carnation Stole Me Lucky Charms. So we went with an emerald ring, but the word deception, and we had this ridiculous email chain back and forth where I'd email at my editor and be like, how about the lore of the emerald ring? And she'd be like, well,
Mm.
marketing says only 10% of people respond to the word lore. Come back with another word. And I'm like, where is marketing getting these statistics? This is crazy. It's like 3 people at the water cooler. But so Band of Sisters was a title, actually. Beatrice, my co-author, came up with, we were on a train to a book event. I was like, I can't think of a title for the Smith book. And she's like, duh, Band of Sisters. I was like, oh, you're totally right. And I sent that and they were like, this is brilliant. I was like, it was Beatrice. But so there are some books where the titles really work. And I love those titles. Like The Other Daughter, the one you read. My working title for that was Her Other Daughter. It was his other daughter.
Yeah.
And we changed it to The Other Daughter, which is actually better, but that was basically my working title. I love that title. It totally fits the book. The book that came out before that has one of my most hated titles. It's called That Summer, which is also the title of the Jennifer Weiner book coming out this summer. But anyway, but that was because I wrote a book about pre-Raphaelites in 1849 London. But my editor had really wanted a beach book. And so she kept being like, let's get summer in the title. And I'm like, this is set in the suburbs of London, 1849. Yeah. It's about Raphaelite painters. She's like, but we can still call it something with summer. And the covers for that one were hilarious. There were women with big beach hats. I'm like, you realize people don't really sunbathe on the Thames? But anyway, so that's the title I hate the most. A lot of them are a toss-up, but they run the gamut.
And could you tell us what you like reading yourself? And maybe if there's anything you've read lately that you'd like to recommend to us?
Well, I've always read all across the board, historical fiction, mysteries, chick lit, romance, fantasy, even a little bit of sci-fi, although I'm generally more leery of that because technology and I hate each other. But I found that the pandemic did a job on my brain. For a while, all I could read were mid-century mysteries, sort of anything in between the 1920s and the 1960s. So I was reading a ton of, there's an author named Patricia Wentworth, who wrote sort of a knockoff Miss Marple type series about a detective, although I think she may have started writing them before Miss Marple. But anyway, a detective named Miss Silver, who, a knitting spinster private investigator who always solves the crime in time for, tea at the vicarage. And I found it incredibly soothing when we were in lockdown, because it was like, our world was in such disorder. But in the Miss Silver books, I knew no matter what happened, she would finish the baby's vest and solve the crime. And so as we also love Mary Roberts Reinhardt, who's considered the American Agatha Christie, but I really needed these books where I would have sort of justice would be served and the world would be put to rights at the end. And people would ask me what I was reading. I have these piles of arcs. I'd be like, well, I just read the 35th Miss Silver book. So I've branched out. Now I find I can also read chick lit and romance again. I adored Alexis Hall's Boyfriend Material, which is a romance that came out this past year. It's hilarious and brilliant and some of the best comic side characters I've ever read. But, I have not been reading much in my own genre. And I think that's partially, that's largely pandemic brain. And I'm hoping, once our world gets back to normal, I'll go back to my old reading habits.
And do you have many unpublished or half-finished books?
I think everyone does. I have a big green trunk I stole from my grandparents when I was little, and it's filled with all the manuscripts before that first published book. Since I got published, way back in the midst of time 20 years ago, I have files. I no longer have printouts that are in a trunk, but I have sort of unfinished files on my computer where I started something and for whatever reason I either didn't keep going with it or wasn't salable. At one point I started a quartet, a young adult quartet about pirates in the Caribbean in the 1660s during the Restoration. And there was a brief phase where everyone thought that the next big thing was going to be YA historical. And so I was so excited about this. I embarked upon it. And 2 weeks later, my agent calls. He's like, so YA historical is dead. I'm like, it didn't even start yet. How is it dead? He's like, it's dead. Don't write the pirates. But so I've got, a whole bunch of stuff like that, fragmentary things in my files.
And have you ever thought about going back to any and trying to fix them up or?
Well, the one that taunts me the most is way back when, I guess it was 2011, I started writing something that's in my files as RCR, Random Contemporary Romance. And I love the Random Contemporary Romance. I wrote about a third of it before I wound up in a deadline crunch for the book I was actually supposed to be writing. And I always keep promising myself that when I have the time, I will go back and finish that random contemporary romance novel because it was just so much fun to write. And actually, that was my plan for this summer. This past summer was I was going to finish Band of Sisters, and then use my downtime before starting the next book to write the random contemporary romance novel. I had not reckoned with pandemic, so it got pushed off again.
No downtime.
Yeah, there was no downtime.
I'm interested to know what you think makes a good story.
I think, it's so funny. I was fighting with my husband about this last night as we were watching one of the many British crime shows we watch. And, he was arguing that it has to be the plot and the intricacy of the plot. And I was arguing that plot is nothing if you don't have believable characters.
Yeah.
Because I really think, plot should grow out of character. That if your characters aren't well fleshed out, well-rounded, then the things they do won't make sense. The plot won't make sense. And even if the plot is incredibly clever, at some point you'll be left thinking, wait, I missed something. Something's not right here. So for me, it always, the origin of good story comes from having believable characters with flaws that drive the story.
Yeah. Patricia's wondering if you have any suggestions for a budding historical fiction writer.
Oh, goodness. Read everything you can get your hands on. Read broadly in terms of I used to back in the day when I was first starting out. I remember I used to go wander around the table, those front tables at Barnes and Noble, seeing what was out, buying, and this was before I had kids, so I had time. So I would buy and read, pretty much everything I could get my hands on and sort of form my own opinions about what I liked, what I didn't like, what worked, what didn't work. But what it meant was that I wound up being very much in step with the zeitgeist because I sort of feel like I don't believe in writing towards the market specifically because the market changes. Like chick lit died overnight. And you never know when a trend is suddenly going to pop. So I think writing towards the market is always a bad idea. But I think if you're reading the books that are coming out, especially the books that are doing really well that everyone's talking about, then you're sort of infused with whatever the current spirit is, and you can take off that and build off that in your own imagination with your own voice in your own way. It might take you in really random directions. You're not trying to write the books that are already there, but they are inspiring you in some way. You're just sinking into the back of your head and influencing you, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And just reminding people before we finish off, if you've got any more questions, please type them in the comments. Could you tell people how we can keep in touch with you?
Oh, yes. Please come visit me on my website, www.laurenwillig.com. You can find all sorts of stuff over there. And also, I spend way too much time hanging out on my author Facebook page, which is, Facebook/Lauren Willig, and on my Instagram page, where you can see both, stuff about the books and also all the baked goods my kids make me make them.
Oh, nice.
So that's also at Lauren Willig. I am technically on Twitter, but I am almost never over there because I've never figured out how to properly use it other than randomly retweeting things periodically. So, do not send anything over there you actually want me to see or respond to, but I am over on Facebook, my Facebook author page and Instagram, responding to stuff all the time.
Thanks for that. And we're also wondering, Patricia says, do you read your reviews?
My friends are always like, don't read the reviews. What I usually do is up until a book comes out, I will read the reviews because there's that weird period when the arcs are out in the world, but you have no idea how anyone is reacting to anything. And it used to be you just waited for the 3 big trade reviews, Kirkus, Publishers Weekly, and Library Journal. And of course now, the world has become so much broader than that. So usually I will read my Goodreads reviews up until the book actually comes out, and then I stop.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
And, I feel very strongly that reviews are really meant to be for other readers rather than the author. And so, if people have stuff that they want to tell me about the book, they should email me through the contact form on my website, and then I'll see it and respond to it. But if I see it in a review, even if I'm tagged, I often will not respond because I feel like it would be intrusive of me.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to.
Yeah. So if people send you a message about your book, then you usually respond to them?
Yes. Depending, And response times vary depending on the childcare situation. But I read them all. I respond when I can. I generally intend to respond. I do have some messages that have embarrassingly sunk to the bottom of my inbox because they hit at times when things were really busy.
Yeah.
And so I never got around to them. And there's always you think you're going to respond at some point, so you save them. But if that happened to anyone out there, I apologize.
Yeah. Well, Lauren, thanks so much for joining us. It's been great chatting to you, and I'm looking forward myself to reading more of your books, and hope we might be able to have you involved in the group again another time.
That would be lovely. Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for having me.
Thanks, and thanks everyone who joined in today. Bye.